bilateral and multilateral experience. He's presently serving as the ambassador of Pakistan to the United States. He's been in this position since March 2017. Prior to this appointment, he was the Foreign Secretary of Pakistan and also the Foreign Office spokesman. He's joined as a discussant tonight by Ambassador Talkir Hussain. He's a former senior diplomat from Pakistan, and he also served as ambassador to Brazil, Spain, and Japan. He's also an adjunct faculty member at Georgetown University. So thank you all for being here, and I will hand it over to Talkir to kick this off. Thank you. Also, before I forget, I do have note cards and pens here. If you didn't get the announcement downstairs about the Q&A, please just raise your hand and I'll give you a note card. We will be delivering those to Talkir, and then he will read out questions for the Q&A portion of this event. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. It's a distinct pleasure for me to be moderating a talk by a very distinguished Pakistani diplomat, a former colleague and a good friend, on a subject of great public interest here. Much talked about, but very little understood. And it's a pity, because I feel that the perceptions of Pakistan don't do justice to its reality. There are many reasons for that. The main reason I feel, this is my view as an academic, not as a former diplomat, I feel that Pakistan is very narrowly defined in this country. And it has always been like that. Those of us familiar with the history of the relationship of US and Pakistan are also aware of the times when relationship with Pakistan was on the other end of the spectrum, very friendly, very close, and Pakistan was known as the most allied ally of the United States, and also it was said that the security of Pakistan is a cornerstone of American foreign policy. Well, that too was a perception that did not really accord with the reality. So in a way, the whole history has been a gap, marked by a gap between perception and the reality. So in good times and bad times, I feel Pakistan has been only partially understood in this country, which is unfortunate, because that is what has led to what you call trust deficit and mutual recriminations, and it doesn't have to be. It's Pakistan is an important country, and it has been at times a very valuable partner for the United States, and it can perform the same function again. It's just that you need to understand the totality of Pakistan, what it is, what it can do, what it has been doing, especially in a region which is changing very fast. So we are very fortunate to have very knowledgeable diplomat, and he will help us understand Pakistan and also help us bridge the gap between perception and the reality.
Thank you. Let me stand here. Maybe this way I'll be able to speak to you all better. Thank you very much, first of all, to Georgetown University for honoring me. It's a great welcome opportunity for me to be in this institution, which is 1789, the founding years. That is great. When it coincides with some remarkable events in history, French Revolution and the writing of the founding documents here. So I'm very, very honored, sir. Thank you very much to you and Mr. Nuruddin. I don't know where he is, but thank you all for inviting me. I'll speak slightly on a different topic, if you allow me, to lay the context. I think for such a learned audience, I think they would appreciate that the world is changing very rapidly, has actually changed. Last night I was coming from another city, and somebody brought to my attention a book that had just come out, so I started reading that on my way. The book is Destined for War. I don't know how many of you have heard about it. It's a book by Graham Allison, who was the head of Belfer Center in the Harvard University. And he argues that United States and China might be destined for war. A very bold statement. And he invokes Thucydides' trap. Do you know what Thucydides is? The Greek general and historian who around 400 BC, when the city-states were fighting each other, and he writes that when Spartans felt that the rise of Athens has instilled fear in them, the war between them became inevitable. So then he goes on to identify about 16 such situations in the last 500 years and notes that 12 of them ended up in a war because of that trap. 4 didn't. The point that I'm making is that the world is changing with the rise of China and resurgence of Russia. And there are questions now on the unipolarity of the world order that we had seen after the demise of Cold War. I'll take you back a few months further when another book, very interesting book from Richard Haas, came on A World in Disarray. How many have seen that, read that? That's another very interesting book I would strongly recommend, because he argues that the post-World War II order is under stress now. And he thinks that the world is in flux, isn't changing, and we don't know what new world order will replace that world order which gave 60, 70 years of peace and stability to the world. About 28, 30 years ago, I was in the Tufts University. And this was the year 1989. And I remember sitting with fellow students in the hall, seeing the tearing down of the Berlin Wall. There was so much of excitement that the world has changed and now the Cold War has demised. So we will probably have a world which is euphoric. So everybody was very optimistic. And for a while it worked like that. If you remember, in the 90s, the United Nations began on an ambitious project of mega conferences. And the objective of those mega conferences was to build a new socio-economic global normative framework so that this globalized world will now get their inspiration from the same value system. So we had the conference on children in 1990, Rio conference, the first environment conference, you remember that, in Brazil in 1992, Human Rights Conference in 1993, then I think population in 1994, and women conference in 1995, Habitat 1999, so on and so on. Because I dealt with these, so I remember these by name. It's not that I remembered them for this very session, but I remember them because I had dealt with these in my 6 years at the United Nations. And we were all very excited about it. After 9/11, we saw the world change again, and that was quite an unexpected turn. Nobody really knew what was going on. And ever since, you've seen that the world, instead of becoming more peaceful, that's what we had hoped for after the demise of the Cold War, is actually not. The conflicts are raging. And biggest of all is the strategic domain that I'm talking about, that the major power rivalry has actually intensified. There have been some attempts. President Xi was here. President Trump has recently visited China. But most of the people believe that this rivalry will intensify. When the United States decided to pivot its policies towards Asia, and that happened during the previous administration, which the present administration had decided to continue, that pivot was largely perceived as a Cold War style containment of China. And then the Chinese responded by their own One Belt, One Road initiative, which touches about 67 countries. So such is the globalized nature of that initiative. The difficulty that we come across is that there are no mechanisms in place to check that rivalry if it intensifies. The Security Council, United Nations Security Council is divided. NATO's role under President Trump is still evolving. Shanghai Cooperation Organization is new and not yet fully settled. And in East Asia, which is home to all these latest conflicts, including North Korea and South China Sea, there is no regional security mechanism. So the strategic domain, the world is moving in a flux, in a change, disarray, or whatever else you call it. Let's see from the state security perspective where we are. Not much different. Transnational terrorism continues in different forms. Bulk of Middle East and North Africa are unstable. So is Afghanistan. And North Korea, through its provocative actions, is keeping the peninsula on the brink of war. And the sources of threats, security threat, have also multiplied. There are conventional imbalances, there are nuclear threat, there is cyber security, there is food insecurity, and so on and so forth. So not a very happy situation there either. So let's see another dimension, socioeconomic. Europe, which was an engine of growth for a good 4 decades, is still, its economy is stagnant, barring a few countries. And we have immigration pressures, which are now projecting the immigrants as a security and economic threat. Something that was a virtue. Immigrants were looked as a virtue, as an asset, but in many societies they are not being looked at exactly that way. Climate change under pressures. International trade, free trade is under attack from protectionist tendencies. For good several decades, the world had negotiated hard to bring down those barriers, which are probably going up. And narrow nationalism is raising its head almost in every society. So you can clearly see, or at least I can clearly see, that be it strategic domain, be it security dimension, or be it socioeconomic plane, I see the world moving in a state of flux, or a change, or disarray. But herein also lies the opportunity to shape it the way we should be shaping it, so that we get another 70, 80, 90, whatever years of peace and security. Now let me zoom into our own region, South Asia, where my country is located. Situation not all that pretty there either. Afghanistan remains unstable. Actually, the security situation in Afghanistan is deteriorating. India and China have an uneasy peace. India and Pakistan are not talking. Iran, the nuclear deal is all but gone, or at least under deep stress. So again, this situation is pretty uncertain. So how has my country, Pakistan, done in these circumstances, global and regional? And I believe that despite all these tough situations, my country has not done bad, especially in the last 2 to 3 years. When I came here about 7, 8 months ago, I noticed that there was a gap between the perception, which Ambassador Tawqir also mentioned, and the reality of Pakistan after these 2 to 3 years. And I tell you why. And there are 4 aspects of it which I will like to highlight. The first one is that from 2004 to 2014, Pakistan suffered from the worst kinds of terrorism. And the history is known to everybody. Soviets came into Afghanistan, whole concept of jihad, Afghan jihad was raised. When the Soviets left, many of these militants, sometimes referred to as jihadis, stayed back. And after 9/11, when Tora Bora was bombed heavily, most of them crossed over to Pakistani mountains. And when Pakistan became a member of international coalition, we became legitimate targets in their eyes. And that's why hardly a day passed when we would not have some kind of terrorist attack by these militants. As much as 150 terrorist incidents on the average per month. Until 2014. In 2014, all politicians got together and they said, enough is enough. We've got to sit together and develop a consensus that terrorism and violence under any pretext is unjustified and is not acceptable. And after that, I think the militants could see what's going to happen. The military moved into the tribal areas which had been held by them, which had been, they had built their sanctuaries, hideouts, IED factories, whatever else. It was a very difficult battle. But we won it. It took us 2 to 3 years. Now the entire territory of tribal areas, which those of you who are history buffs would know, had been deliberately left without a settled governance by the British India and Russian Empire, is now under the state control. Now this is not a mean achievement, but it came at a big cost. We suffered. Over 6,000 soldiers and officers were lost. 3,000 civilians were lost. But we made it. And we made it also in their mindset, because the Taliban and the other militants had created a narrative, a very simple narrative, a clever one, which was a flawed narrative, but they had created that narrative. The narrative was that, look, when the Soviets came into Afghanistan, they used to call them infidels. We pushed the infidels out. Now the Americans are there, we will push them away. And since it's a holy duty, please support us. This is jihad. So that was, but if it's such a holy duty, why would you kill innocent people in the marketplaces, on the streets, in the schools, in the mosques? Somebody had to expose that. And they also provided an excuse for our hard action against them. A big price that we had to pay for that. They attacked a school in Peshawar, where they killed in December 2014 137 children mercilessly. These were the children of those army soldiers and officers who were fighting them in the mountains. So thereafter, I think we never look back. Today, not even the far right of the political fringes has any objections to that hard action that we have taken. But we are happy about it. The law and order has improved, the terrorist incidents have gone down, economic situation has improved, investments are pouring in. Of course, bulk of the investments are coming from China, but so are Koreans and Turks and Europeans and now corporate America coming in a very big way in Pakistan. And I think we are happy, but we don't want to be complacent about it, because we know that all these gains that we have made in these 2-3 years in the security domain and on the economic front could be at risk if Afghanistan next door is not stable. We have seen that the open porous border between Pakistan and Afghanistan has been a source of trouble for Pakistan. Whenever Afghanistan is unstable, the instability flows into Pakistan. We have seen it time and again. So for 38 years, when Soviet forces came into Afghanistan and then 5 million, now 3 million refugees flowed in, along came the Kalashnikov culture, along came the drug mafia, criminals, and what have you. And we are reeling after the effects of that until today. So people believe that we need to see Afghanistan stabilize. And we believe that this country, which has also invested very heavily, the United States, in Afghanistan for nearly $680 billion already spent and $21 billion a year recurring cost still ahead, would also like to stabilize Afghanistan. You can't have an open-ended, everlasting wars. So we see that the main objective of both countries, Pakistan and Afghanistan, are the same. And we want to move in that direction. The third area that change that is not appreciated that much is that Pakistan's recent census shows that bulk of our population is young. In fact, 60% of our population is below the age of 30. Now, that is a big asset if you use them well, and it's a huge liability if you don't. So we have to be, it cuts both ways. And the fourth is the democratic process. Pakistan has not been that fortunate. Our democratic process was interrupted 4 times. But for the last 8-9 years, we have been continuing on this path. And in the process, we're also discovering that democratic processes are noisy by definition. But some values of accountability and transparency and others are also coming up, and people are learning from that experience. Our relationships with our neighbors, China, has always been a strong relationship. But we also know that we would not like that relationship at the cost of our relations with the United States. We think that the United States and Pakistan and China and Pakistan can have win-win relationships. And that's what we want to see. Our relationship with India, our eastern larger neighbor, unfortunately has not been peaceful. Yet I think there is a desire on both sides, and I personally in my career dealt with this for a long, long time, that there is a deep down desire to have peaceful coexistence, and that's the only direction to go to. I'll go into details once we sit and have any question answers on that. With Iran, if the nuclear deal is scrapped, it's still not, then the whole situation will change again. Then Iran will come under sanctions again, and Pakistan has suffered from those sanctions on Iran. So we had supported that deal. So let me conclude, because I want to leave time, as I had promised you that I would speak only for 20 minutes. The situation worldwide is not very welcoming. The world is changing very fast, rapidly, and moving into a state of disarray. Our own region, South Asia, also is not in the best of the situation. In Pakistan, there are streaks of achievements, but there are risks, as I indicated to you. So I think enormous amount of statesmanship is required to steer the world, our region, and my own country in a direction that will serve the cause of peace. So I'll pause here and come to that chair, and we'll take your questions with great pleasure and go into details in some of those issues. So God bless you all. God bless Pakistan, God bless America, and God bless your countries.
Fascinating, and thank you so much, Ambassador Chaudhry, for not only diplomatic but a very scholarly analysis of happenings in the world, and particularly in our part of the world over there, the geopolitical landscape, the regional environment, and Pakistan's internal dynamics, and we have woven together a very compelling and coherent and very comprehensive narrative, and I'm sure the audience will benefit from this. I would have liked to ask a couple of questions, but there are so many questions here. I don't
okay,
want
good.
to, take away time from them, so I'm foregoing my sort of privilege to ask questions and have time for
Certainly,
these
certainly.
questions. As the US moves closer to India on economic grounds, it will naturally create a rift in the US-Pakistan relations, as evident by recent statements made by the US policymakers and generals. How is Pakistan going to cope with this situation?
There is no doubt that after US decision to pivot its policies towards Asia, I indicated to you that this was largely perceived as a containment of China policy. Alongside came the United States tilt towards India and forging a strategic partnership with India. About the same time, Pakistan was going through a change of government. It is 2013. Both China and Pakistan. In China, they had a new leadership, President Xi. In Pakistan, they had a new party. Both had economic priorities. And Chinese model was, I think they wanted to move from export-led growth to mobilizing domestic consumption, and wanted to shift part of the activity from Eastern China, where it is concentrated, to Western China, which is under less developed region. And East China, South China Sea was also not that stable, and bulk of the ports exporting Chinese goods were on Eastern China. So the Chinese wanted to develop the Western China, and they thought that the best way to reach to the waters would be through Pakistan, which will be far shorter if they were to move goods to and fro from Western China, 5,000 kilometers to Eastern China, then another 8,000 kilometers around Malacca Strait into the Indian Ocean and back to where they would go onward to Mediterranean. So this was a much shorter 2,000 kilometers route, so it made perfect sense for them. And it made perfect sense for Pakistan because our own western part were also not very developed. So for us and for the Chinese, this was a natural undertaking that would benefit people of Pakistan and people of Western China. But somehow it coincided with this US strategic partnership with India. And therefore the alignments or the perceived alignments were sharpened. So people thought that now the equation is US, India, Pakistan, China, and therefore this kind of rivalry or this kind of tussle or tension should be the defining feature. I don't think so, honestly. I don't think so that's the way to go. As I indicated to you, Pakistan believes that all our bilateral relationships, indeed all bilateral relationships of the United States, China, or India, or any other country, are not a zero-sum game. And I don't think that it should remain so. For Pakistan and United States, we have had this relationship for 70 years. Yes, we have seen ups, and yes, we have seen downs. But we've also seen that this relationship is resilient enough to always come back. It has touched lows. Somebody made a very nice graph. He said that 60s we were up, 70s down, 80s up, 90s down, 2000s up, 2010s down. So by that geography, I leave it to your imagination where it should go. But that's somebody's research. The point is that I am not as pessimistic just because new alignments are emerging in Asia, but I think the political acumen would require that we make better use of those alignments and produce relationships which are beneficial. We don't want to take the world into further disarray.
Thank you, sir. What differences does Pakistan see in Gilgit-Baltistan and Indian Kashmiris in terms of development and social order?
I don't know what differences mean.
Differences.
Differences.
Yeah,
What differences?
Yeah.
Well, Gilgit-Baltistan is a beautiful part of Pakistan. It is federally administered, and we have major activity now going on because many of the energy projects will be located in Gilgit-Baltistan. And many of the projects, including for the China-Pakistan economic corridor, will pass through Gilgit-Baltistan. A number of steps have been taken. For a long time, Gilgit-Baltistan could not get full emancipation or full political rights because of its linkage with Kashmir. Some part of Gilgit-Baltistan has never been part of the state of Jammu and Kashmir, but some parts on which suzerainty of the Kashmiri rulers had been announced. So we don't see any issue for us. I think the economic activity that is to happen in the area of Gilgit-Baltistan will benefit the people. It's not for or against anybody. And I think that should go.
How do you see the threat of climate change affecting relations between India and Pakistan? Will water shortage and ecological threats encourage greater cooperation or increase the threat of war?
Well, we are certainly a vulnerable region for climate changes. We get all of our water from Himalayas, and so does India. And we had these arrangements under the Indus Waters Treaty, which had worked remarkably well for a long time. There are some issues that have come up now. We hope that we can find solution to those also. But we have to know that these climate changes will affect us in more than just the supply of water. And I'll give you an example. In 2010, Pakistan received a very different kind of floods. It was some part of glacier melted disproportionately more, and it was a bulge of water that started moving from north to south, and wherever it went, it drowned about 2 kilometers of territory on both sides of its pathway. So after 2 days, back to normal flow. So this is the kind of unpredictable and uncertain changes that you can expect from climate. We also suffer from not enough forestation. Recently, you also saw both countries, part of both countries, suffering from smog and pollution. I believe that these are challenges, but they also provide opportunities. And if we are wise and sensible, we should be able to use those challenges and convert them into opportunities.
Thank you very much.
Opportunities for cooperation.
Cooperation. How does Pakistan hope to navigate, not navigate, negotiate the Saudi-Iran rivalry? I think it's navigate and negotiate. So the Saudi-Iran.
I think both are relevant.
Both are relevant.
Saudi-Iran rivalry, and how does Pakistan navigate or
Navigate.
or negotiate?
Yeah, navigate.
Both countries are friends of Pakistan, have been. For Saudi Arabia, it is home to over 22 million Pakistanis working there. It is home to two of the holiest shrines of great reverence for people of Pakistan, Muslims as a whole. And Saudi Arabia has been steadfast in friendship with Pakistan for a long time. Iran is a neighbor, and we have had a deep cultural imprint from Persia. Not only Pakistan, the whole of India actually had that imprint. And therefore, for us to choose sides is not possible. So our plea to both countries has been that you should find ways which are peaceful to resolve your differences. It is not the time to have disputes in the Muslim world. The entire Muslim world, as indeed the rest of the world, is grappling with a terrible enemy called terrorism. And some of the very ugly forms like ISIS and Al-Shabaab and Boko Haram and the Taliban and others have come up. And therefore, it is extremely important that every country should contribute towards bringing peace in that so-called rivalry, and Pakistan is playing that part.
Thank you. We are being hosted by the Berkeley Center. That we are sitting here, and that's a center which deals with question of religious freedom, and there are 3-4 questions relating to that. So I have to at least pick one. I mean,
Yeah, no, please pick all three, combine them, read them down to me.
Important. I mean, most of them are kind of duplicating. So I will just pick one, which is
Sure.
kind of which covers the whole ground.
Certainly.
The minority population in Pakistan has gone down significantly in the last 30 years. Non-Muslim minorities have been reduced to less than 2%. Even Muslim Shias and Ahmadiyas are now targeted. How do you fix this?
Well, I believe that the Constitution of Pakistan accords equal status to all citizens of Pakistan. So that's the direction that we should go in. Yes, it is true that in Pakistan, as indeed in many other countries of the world, there has been a tendency for the right-wing elements, and they do not necessarily have to be from the world of Islam, they could be from any religion. But the mainstream people of Pakistan do not like that kind of extremist behavior one bit. So as a result, in the last several years, and particularly after these two democratic governments, Pakistan has signed on to a large number of human rights instruments like ICCPR and ICESCR and CAT, which is against torture, and CEDAW and many others. And we participate very regularly in the international processes, including in the UPR. In fact, last week was our third UPR. UPR is Universal Peer Review, which is done in Geneva, where a country presents its report, and there are all the countries of the world raise questions and observations, and we go back. We had first one in 2008, and we collected some 88 recommendations. We went back 4 years later, we came back and we gave a report on that. We collected another 62, we went back, and last year, 2017, last week, we gave the third UPR. The point that I'm making is that it is getting better. We are not there yet. But the good thing is that perhaps thanks to social media, thanks to the information age, the civil society in Pakistan has become very vocal. And they have, started contributing to this. I'll give you an example. There is a lady, Sharmeen Obaid-Chinoy, so she took up a documentary on honor killing and acid throwing, and she produced 2 documentaries. The end result was that the parliamentarians took up these causes, and now we have laws, so that if anybody is doing anything wrong on that count, will be prosecuted. So, and I think we need to do this. Blasphemy law is often criticized, and we believe that the misuse of blasphemy law, there's nothing wrong with blasphemy law as such, because most of the world has had it for a long time.
Yes.
The point is that we should revere those people and personalities and give them due respect. But it's the misuse, and the bulk of the victims of blasphemy law are Muslims, not Christians or others. I believe Pakistan has a very rich cultural heritage. from Christianity, from Hinduism, from Sikhism, and we have their holy places there, and we revere them, and we, in fact, if you come to my embassy, you have come to my embassy, but if others do, I'll show you the books we have published, and we'll be very happy to share with you those books, because that's part of our heritage. That's the kind of pluralistic, tolerant Pakistani society we are trying to build.
Thank you. What do you think are the biggest challenges Pakistan is facing in strengthening the democratic institutions?
Well, I think the democratic institutions are taking roots, and I believe the process must go on. And the continuity of the process is most important. And then we should also, I believe, place the democratic process on a very solid foundation of value system. And just like this country has based it on the values that founding fathers defined for them in their basic documents, the values of democracy and freedom and liberty and rule of law and justice. I think these are the values which endear the people of United States to the people of Pakistan, because these are the values that our people yearn for and should be the basis for any democratic process that goes on in Pakistan.
Your talk has inspired some very good questions, and I will just maybe take two questions in one, because they're more or less related. What do you think is the biggest impediment to the US-Pakistan relations? One question, and the second question, what do you think of President Trump's policy in Afghanistan? Do you think it will be effective? So I thought you can,
Well, I think
you can address both of them in one.
Yeah, sure, we'll be happy. I think the most urgent need to address in the relationship between Pakistan and United States is the resurrection of the trust that the two countries had. For 70 years, these two countries have cooperated extensively. And I believe that that cooperation has benefited both countries. And whenever we did not work together, both countries suffered. And therefore, I am fully convinced that there are enough elements on both sides which are convinced that we must rebuild the trust level and begin to work together. And it links up very neatly with the present situation in Afghanistan. That is where actually the need is most urgent for the two countries to work together. Afghanistan, as I had indicated in my talk to you a little while ago, has been in war for a long time. It's unfortunate for the people of Afghanistan. It's unfortunate for the people of Pakistan, who have also suffered indirectly. But it's also not a very happy position for the United States, which has also invested very heavily for the last 16 years. And we believe that the policy that President Trump announced on August 21 weighed too heavily on the military solution. Pakistan believes that we need a comprehensive political solution for the situation in Afghanistan. That should have several tracks. It should have peace and reconciliation process between all Afghan factions. It should have, of course, the military component for those who are irreconcilable. It should address the issue of drugs, because drug money is funding a lot of activity. There was a report some months back that the net growth from last year to this year in drug production was 43%, and now we have received another report, actually it has doubled. And since 9/11, it has been 3,700 times growth. So we've got to deal with that aspect. Then the border management, got to deal with that because there are bad guys who cross that border. It's 2,600 kilometers long border from Pakistan side and do bad things on Afghanistan side and come back. And there are bad guys going from Afghanistan side to Pakistan side and come back. We got to remove those, their ability to cross border at will. It's a difficult border. It's not easy, but we've got to do it. Pakistan in the last 10 years has received 2,500 attacks from Afghan side, and Afghanistan has received 200 attacks from Pakistan side. So I think it's important that the border is managed. We have started that work, and we have receiving cooperation from the United States that we need to build posts all along the border. We can't leave it open, and any entry or any crossing should be by valid documents. We believe that it should be part of the equation. Repatriation of Afghan refugees should also be part of the equation. That's equally important. Then, of course, governance issues within Afghanistan, corruption issues and other issues. So I think it has to be a compact, holistic, comprehensive approach that, in our view, would stand a better chance of bringing peace to Afghanistan and by extension to Pakistan.
Thank you. I will just take last two questions, and my apologies to those whose questions could not be covered because we have already sort of fielded a lot of questions for the ambassador and he has to go also. So I will just ask the last two questions, but I assure you that the questions I selected and the ones who could not be covered, they were subsumed in the one that I selected. So everybody's question has been answered in one form or the other. What, according to you, is the way in which Pakistan and perhaps even China could work with India in bringing it on board for the proposed CPEC so that Indian part of Kashmir benefits as well?
I believe that China-Pakistan Economic Corridor is for the whole region. I believe it is first and foremost for the people of Western China and the western part of Pakistan. But I believe that if in the larger scheme of things, this should blossom out to east and west. In fact, the first beneficiary should be Afghanistan because if you go northward from Gwadar port, the first stop would be perhaps Kandahar, which is the nearest point. So my sense is that eventually this should augur connectivity benefits to whole of region. I believe that Pakistan and India should not waste any further time and should start talking. I believe that Pakistan and China should continue on this path of cooperation. I believe China and India should, I think they have a kind of relationship. So I think we got to, and that's why I sketched the world where it is headed. And I believe that it is extremely important for countries in our region to see what the future holds for them. I think the benefits of cooperation far outweigh confrontation. That's what I think.
Last question. Is there concern over the excessive debt burden brought on by CPEC investments? Can you speak on internal debates over Chinese investment?
Well, I think there is a misunderstanding about the debt burden associated with it. It started with $46 billion, out of which $35 billion was basically private commercial deals. Government had nothing to do with it, so there was no point in calculating that the government will pick up the debt burden because they were between the Chinese state enterprises and the private enterprises within Pakistan. So that has nothing. The only tab that the government of Pakistan picked up was $11 billion for the port in Gwadar and for completing the motorway between Karachi and Lahore. Actually, bulk of it was done, only one segment was given to it, and some projects for energy, and that's it. So I don't think that is going to add to the burden of debt for Pakistan. And since for the last 2 years we have invested heavily in energy and we have invested heavily in infrastructure, and which are all about to come ashore, That's why corporate America is going there. Many of the companies which were not present there have gone there, which were present but had pulled out has gone back, and many who were there had actually beefed it up because they are preparing for themselves for the bonanza that might happen next year. And the plan now is to move on to building the economic zones all along the corridors. And those economic zones will be open for investments, not only from China but from all other sources. So I am optimistic actually about it because the economic activity that it would generate would benefit Pakistan, and I hope that it would benefit the whole region.
Thank you so much, and I'm so grateful that you sort of made us all wiser with a very learned, very informative, and very honest and candid review of so many critical issues that are facing the world and Pakistan and our region. And the best compliment I can pay you is that you did not speak like a diplomat.
Oh, well,
Thank you so much.
No, thank you very much. Thank you very much. You guys are studying in one of the best institutions of the world, so you must be very proud, and I'm sharing part of that pride by being here. So have a very good night, and thank you so much. I have to rush to an event which had started at 7, but I told them that I'll be, somewhat late. But better late than never. Thank you very much. God bless you all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.